Just like that, it's over. The Metroid Prime 4 situation has escalated to the next natural stage in which actual genuine fans, like myself, love the game, hype the game up, are really enthusiastic about it. The game will continue doing well. Nintendo's happy with it. We'll get a sequel. The entire coping and seething cycle has been completely and totally exposed as just being tourists complaining. And that's the number one thing about this. The thing you'll notice, like, when it comes to any one of these people, any individual, whether it's like SyntheticMan or any one of these grifters, anybody else who's like talking about this Grums, Medicare, the Daka guy, whoever the fuck that is. Like, when it comes to anybody complaining about Metroid Prime 4, everyone complaining is just a tourist. And that's the most important thing to know when talking about this game, is that these guys were never going to buy Metroid, they were never going to support it, they were never going to be enthusiastic about it, they were not there for Federation Force, they were not there for, Metroid Dread or Samus Returns. In fact, those were the people complaining about those games to begin with, Like, it's kind of crazy how we have been getting high-quality Metroid games for a decade, and yet we're still seeing a lot of people act as if, like, Metroid is like some neglected, ignored Nintendo franchise, when in actuality it's been getting pretty consistent releases the past several years. It's embarrassing, and it has been for a long time. I remember when people were complaining about Metroid Prime 2 and Fusion, actually the original Metroid Prime as well. It's remarkable looking at this situation and kind of realizing very gradually that this is the same kind of thing that happened when Metroid Prime 1 came out, where everybody had this idea that this was going to be like Nintendo's equivalent to Halo, that it'd be some like, multiplayer first-person shooter, and they got angry and upset when it wasn't anything like that, Like, oh no, you have to solve puzzles in this? Oh, I don't like thinking. Oh, I'm SyntheticMan and I'm an incel and I sit in my mother's basement. Like that's what you get from a lot of these people, is that whenever these guys try and play a Metroid game, they very quickly expose themselves as not being real fans. How many times have we heard, this line of dialogue from people who, like, believe Samus has never talked in older games, who believe the games don't have characters other than Samus, who believe that there's, like, Metroid's always been about loneliness and isolation. Remember when, like, people were saying that, like, there are no NPCs in Metroid, which is, like, retarded? We've had them since, like, Metroid 2, okay? It's, like, it's just a gigantic cope, brought about by some weird misappropriation of what the series is based on, like, pop culture and just, general, like, game journal nonsense. It's kind of like how, back in the day, back in the 2000s, when, like, it was really common to act as if Navi from Ocarina of Time was very, very, very annoying, when in actuality, like, she doesn't behave like that. She never has, never will. Like, the entire thing was just a meme concocted by people who were just trying to make Ocarina of Time look ridiculous. And Prime 4 has gone through a very similar character arc. A lot of people still insist that Miles McKenzie handholds you through the entire game, when, like, he actually can't contact you at all outside of the Soul Desert, which is, Soul Valley, which is something that you don't really see a lot of people acknowledge or talk about, Like, I have seen people, people like SyntheticMan, accuse Miles of being, like, too overbearing and, telling them what to do, and then turn around and, like, start complaining about, them not knowing what to do, or not knowing where to go, or not knowing what they're supposed to do. It is remarkable, the weird double standard when it comes to these people, when it comes to this kind of thing. And I do think this is the beginning of the end of this. I do think this is the beginning of the end of this narrative, because this is the first time, I think, that we've gotten, like, a significant amount of pushback day one when it comes to a Metroid Prime release. Because when Metroid Prime 1 came out, people were perfectly willing to accept that the GameCube was a joke, that Metroid Prime was a joke, that Halo was the future. Halo was the future of SPS. And, of course, Metroid has remained relevant and popular long after Halo has fallen off and become irrelevant, right? a lot of people are in denial about that fact, but that's the simple reality of it, is that Metroid established an entire niche. It has its own unique fan culture. It has its own unique vibe. Halo is the very definition of generic, It is the Warhammer 40K of video games. It is the basic bitch FPS Space Marine title, featuring a bald Space Marine. It is the epitome of everything wrong with AAA game devs long before people started, acknowledging this as a problem. And it's so remarkable to me to see how often, these tourists come out and complain about, Metroid not being enough like Halo, not playing like Halo, not being like Halo, while, simultaneously trying to pretend to be, serious Metroid fans. Samus shouldn't have friends. It's like, what? It's ridiculous. And it does feel as if more and more people are starting to notice this, so many people who purport themselves to be, hardcore Metroid fans don't know the slightest thing about the Metroid Prime side series. A lot of them didn't know about, what happened in Federation Force. A lot of them weren't expecting the Galactic Federation troopers to be in this at all, right? A lot of people were blindsided by that, which I think goes to show you just how little these people know about the franchise and about what's actually happening in these games. A lot of people are still trying to complain about the desert, which is, better than something you would see in, say, The Witcher 3 or Grand Theft Auto 5 or Metal Gear Solid 5 or Cyberpunk 2077. It is, it's unbelievable how desperate the community is to keep up this illusion that this game is a disappointment, because I think a lot of these guys really thought that Metroid Prime 4 was going to be one of the big major games this year, when in actuality it was always going to trail behind Kirby Air Riders. It was always going to trail behind Pokemon. It was always going to be, trail behind Donkey Kong and Mario Kart. And the reason for that is that Metroid is just not that successful of an IP. And as we know, this game has had a very rough development period. And having it release now was probably only done because of the Switch 2's release. So, looking at, what's been happening with this game, seeing how, the community has been, spurging about it, I would hope that this is the beginning of the end of, this narrative that Metroid is, some super popular, iconic Nintendo brand, because it's not. Actual Metroid fans were really happy with this game, but casuals, normies, tourists, they were the ones upset. They were the ones seething. They were the ones making things up about it and complaining about it and not knowing basic controls. I had to tell SyntheticMan on stream how to summon the bike because he didn't know how to do it. His audience didn't know how to do it. Harmon Smith had to go in there and tell him what to do. That's the level of intellect we're dealing with when it comes to these people. These guys can't read basic tutorials. They can't follow along with Metroid Prime 4's plot. They can't follow up. They can't, use their imaginations really to think about these characters and their relationships and Samus and her role in the plot. They can't really do anything without it being kind of, spoon-fed to them like they're watching The Last of Us, on HBO, right? They can't handle a video game, in other words. It's very, very interesting kind of seeing this situation, kind of seeing, what's been happening, and kind of realizing just how doomed the Pretendo community actually is, because this is something that a couple of years ago would have been a major controversy. Other M coming out the way it did was seen as this huge betrayal in the eyes of the fan base. Everybody was making videos about it. Everyone was spurting about it. You had Spoonie making a video about it. You had everyone bending over backwards. You were demonized if you dared like it. How dare Dobson like Other M? Oh, it's the cringiest thing he's ever done. Other M isn't that bad. It's still way better than anything Halo has ever done. But with Metroid Prime 4, right, you are not seeing any of that to the same extent. The people who are complaining about Metroid Prime 4 are just tourists. That's what we've been seeing. That's what's been going on. That's like just the pattern that's been happening over and over again, is that these guys don't know the first thing about Metroid and are exposing themselves constantly every day.